Good evening. My name is Pedro Daniel Rivera, and this is Bio 520, instructor by Dr. Sandra Barrera. During my presentation, I will be discussing the function of pulmonary surfactant. In addition, I'll be providing some examples of its application when considering neonates as proposed by Hoffeld et al. So without further ado, let us begin. The objectives that I will be covering tonight during this presentation are as follows. I will first begin by discussing respiratory distress syndrome and how it applies to this topic. Furthermore, I will discuss how providers may diagnose abnormalities with pulmonary surfactant. I will also cover pulmonary surfactant treatment and how it is used in combating respiratory distress syndrome. Finally, I will discuss some forms of pulmonary surfactants in use today. So what is pulmonary surfactant? So pulmonary surfactant, as described by Hoffeld et al., is composed of both phospholipids and surfactant-specific proteins. This is an important and crucial, very crucial lubricant that is synthesized within the alveolar region by the type 2 pneumocytes. So what does this have to do with respiratory distress syndrome, also known as RDS? So this condition is very important and can be very, very deadly for neonates. It's typically found again in newborns. Newborns with this condition have an impaired lung function, and it is really due to the fact of the lack of surfactant that's being produced. So typically healthy newborns do not have problems with RDS, and that's because they're producing enough of that surfactant. So premature babies, on the other hand, are the ones at the higher risk. So it is said that the production of surfactant begins at about 20 weeks of gestation. Thus, this means that premature babies are at higher risk, and if they're born before this time, the production of surfactant is not significant enough to allow for that manifestation, of that surfactant, and to be able to aid in their respiratory, with their respiratory system. So a lot of them will have respiratory distress. So what really happens if the production of surfactant is impaired? So how does that look like? What does that do to the body? What does this do to these neonates? Okay. So I have some examples here on the slide. It shows a description of it shows some images of normal alveoli and collapsed alveoli. If you would notice the images, you're going to see some images of a stain biopsy with normal and abnormal staining. And then below it, you will see a digital graphic description of how you would see it, these conditions, again, normal and abnormal, if we were actually in vivo. So if we look at these images, when there is a reduction in surfactant production, the alveoli are susceptible to collapse. So they don't have that support. You could even think about it as a brittle balloon. When a balloon kind of gets all heated and the elasticity just gives out because it's been out in the hot sun, doesn't have nothing, so it just breaks. That's kind of how you could think of what surfactant, the lack of surfactant, will do to the lungs. Okay, it just doesn't have that elasticity. It can't, stretch out. It just becomes all crumbly and brittle. So on the stained image, we can see how the collapsed alveoli is more prominent. And this is, it is easy to see how the surface tension would also be greater if everything was compressed. So the neonate with this condition will not be able to take in the required air to be perfused throughout the vital organs. The normal stain, on the other hand, along with the normal digital graphic, demonstrates the alveoli able to take on the necessary oxygen along with the reduced surface tension that is being provided again by the surfactant. Now, let us look at the image to the right. This is another example of pulmonary surfactant impairment. So Hoffeld et al. Explained that pulmonary surfactant is crucial as well to small airway function, in addition to the alveoli support, as we have already explained. So some of the studies that the article by Hoffeld et al. Presented included findings of surfactant contributing positively to the prevention of bronchiolar collapse. So the research continued to implicate the importance of low surface tension and how low surface tension reduce the negative pressure within the airway liquid layer. So if we look at the image on the right, we can see a depiction of an airway collapsing due to the lack of inner wall pressure. And this is all contributed to the lack of surfactant. So again, without surfactant, we could see how the lungs are impaired greatly, and lung function, especially for these neonates, you can imagine how hard it will be for them to be able to breathe. So besides the obvious respiratory distress that a neonate might be presenting in the hospital, what are other diagnostic measures that the providers can use to ensure that the treatment is actually working? So how can providers diagnose this condition? So definitely, again, like I said, there will be signs of respiratory distress. That will be obvious. But to confirm the findings, the provider may use x-rays to help them diagnose pulmonary surfactant abnormalities. So as we look at the image on the slide, we can see a comparison between surfactant, the before surfactant treatment and after surfactant treatment. The image on the left was taken again before the treatment and demonstrates a very hazy image. And this haziness is due to a lack of oxygen. That's why it looks very hazy. You can't really depict if there's any, you can't even see the internal organs and stuff. Okay. The image on the right, on the other hand, was taken after surfactant treatment was implemented. And it demonstrates a darker image with visibility of the heart as well and other vital organs. So this shows that there's oxygen actually being perfused and the surfactant is actually working. So again, this is a good tool that is used by providers to ensure that the treatment is actually working and that the patient indeed is taking in enough oxygen. Very, very important and very helpful tool to ensure that the neonates are receiving the treatment that they need and that their lungs are actually working. All right, so next we'll discuss some treatment options. So we have to realize that surfactant is super important, but it is a piece of the puzzle. There's other parts that need to that contribute to making these neonates better and to ensure that they survive. So there are various treatments that can be used. It is important to know that synthetic pulmonary surfactant is available, and that is a good thing. This means that this product is readily available off the shelf to help save lives. Okay, so and typically the replacement therapy with surfactant has to be accompanied by ventilation. As you can see in the picture, um, surfactant is being administered, but it is connected to oxygen as well. So the child is intubated. He's getting the medication, the liquid surfactant, but he's also receiving the necessary oxygen in order to help his or her lungs. Because until the surfactant actually starts working, they still need that supplemental oxygen to be able to survive. Okay, so now we can see from the depiction of the neonate after he's being intubated, as I already said, he's receiving that supplemental oxygen and is receiving the surfactant treatment. As they're receiving that surfactant treatment and that oxygen, we can now see how that treatment helps the alveoli. If you see those pictures that are blown up to the left, you see A, it looks all shriveled up, right? And then just imagine A being in that condition and then in becoming expanding and becoming back to normal shape after the surfactant is actually takes effect. So we can see that the alveoli begins to stretch back out to their normal size, and now they're able to carry out that gas exchange. So now that neonate is able to take in oxygen, the lungs are able to function correctly and distribute that oxygen throughout the vital organs. So we will see, like we saw in the image before, we will see now if they take x-rays and the lungs are working properly, we'll see that nicer, darker image where we can see all the vital organs, and we can see that the neonate is perfusing correctly, that they're taking in the necessary oxygen. So again, this is a great example of the different treatment that they would use in combination with ventilation, intubation, and the surfactant. So it's not just one thing. They got to use multiple things in order to make this happen and increase survivability. Okay, so in conclusion, we understand, we discussed the function of surfactant and that the surfactant is vitally important to our bodies. That it prevents the lungs from collapsing. And this is crucial for neonates when they're born before they could start producing the surfactant. They're at high risk of their lungs collapsing, and so it's very dangerous for them. And it's very crucial that uh, that the providers take action in order to mitigate any complications, serious complications. So it also provides that lubrication that's required to keep the surface tension at bay. In case that way you don't have that friction. Remember the like the balloon, like a balloon being all like out in the sun, dried up. You try to blow it up, it won't blow up. It's all sticky and stuff like that, and it's just wants to break apart. You could imagine that with the lungs if they did not have surfactant. That's kind of like the analogy you could use to kind of, or that comparison to kind of visualize that. If it has surfactant, it's like a balloon that's normal that you could inflate. It still has the elasticity, and it functions like it's supposed to. It blows up, and you know, and it stretches normally. So this special lubricant, which we know as surfactant, it is also synthesized by the alveoli, as we already discussed, and it's a critical component in the survival of premature babies. Luckily, modern medicine has made it possible for this product to be, to be in the form of in a synthetic form, of pulmonary surfactant that is readily available and can impact survival rates amongst our most vulnerable. Finally, we have discussed respiratory distress syndrome, diagnostic measures, and pulmonary surfactant treatments. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. This is a very crucial product that is so necessary for our most vulnerable, as we already discussed. But luckily, we have a way and a means to counteract some of the negative effects when premature babies are not able to produce surfactant on their own. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.